Hello and welcome to the Rippling Pages podcast. This is the podcast where we have a coffee with the world's most interesting writers to inspire your reading and your writing. Yes, this is the podcast where you can rely on writers to get real about writing. You're here for some bonus content today with my guest Deepa Anappara. I was speaking to Deepa about her book, The Last of Earth, which is published by One World Publications. It was one of our Rippling Pages coffee conversations, so where I'm live and having a coffee with Deepa Anappara. Deepa's book is set in 1869 and Tibet is a forbidden kingdom closed to foreigners. It was an unwilling participant in what is called the Great Game, a geopolitical rivalry which is probably the best way of describing it. And that didn't become a full-scale war between Russia and the United Kingdom. It was these kingdoms trying to expand their territories, about what was at stake for those explorers who secretly, conceitedly, and ambitiously tried to cross them. And so it's a beautiful book about boundaries and borders and maps, but there's also really core personal experience in there for Deepa that she explores. What I've got for you today, though, is some bonus content, and it's a Rippling Pages Objects of Influence. Yes, it's back. We haven't done this for a while, have we? So this is where we ask the writer to tell us about a particular object that was with them in the writing of the book that we're talking about. And as you hear in this interview, we've had a few objects, quite an eclectic taste of objects over the years. But for Deepa, it is a book. How do you feel about this book? I really do love the book that Deepa is talking about for some of the reasons that she picks out. Do you feel the same? Why don't you let me know when you leave a review of the Rippling Pages? If you enjoy the Rippling Pages, leave a 5-star review of the podcast on your favourite podcast provider. And then what you're also going to hear is a little snippet from the Rippling Pages Rippling Points podcast. So this is a podcast for Patreon subscribers. So this is a podcast for those who really want to understand the ideas behind books. Why is it the writers do what they do? So I've got a little snippet for you, a nice little preview. There's a link in the show notes to the Patreon. So this is an exclusive line of content from the Rippling Pages. If you sign up, you get some other benefits. And of course, you support this podcast. You support me trying to do this work and bring these wonderful writers to you. In any case, in whatever form, it's just great to have you here. And I love having you here, listening to the Rippling Pages. Okay, shall we get into it? Well, just a little bit more about Deepa. Her previous and debut novel, Djinn Patrol on the Purple Line. It was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction and was named as one of the best books of the year by New York Times, The Washington Post, The Guardian, and NPR. She's also co-edited Letters to a Writer of Colour, a brilliant collection of personal essays on fiction, race, culture, featuring writers such as Madeleine, Thien, and Jean Rougeau. Okay, let's get into it. This is Deepa Anappara on Objects of Influence. Now, on the Rippling Pages, as part of our bonus content, we talk about objects of influence, and this is about either an item, a book, something that was with the writer during the process of writing. Influence comes in many different forms, and we want to explore that on the Rippling Pages. We spoke about the significance of Moby Dick, but perhaps can you tell us about the significance potentially of this particular copy or edition?
I'm so sorry to say there's no significance to this edition. It was the one that I could find. And but during the pandemic, this was the book that was next to me, and I was reading it every day. So it was almost like the way people were. There are people in India who read from, say, the Gita or the Mahabharata every day, and I was reading Moby Dick every day.
Are they spiritual books?
In India?
Yes.
Yeah, so that typically you read from a religious text. So if you're a Hindu, you might read from, different religious texts. So for me, it was almost like that because it was giving me the conviction to write this novel, which, I started out by thinking it would be a straightforward adventure novel. And I could very quickly see that that was not. And reading Melville was essentially the way in which I could convince myself that I was on the right path, that it was okay to do this. And there are such beautiful descriptions of each of the characters. It has a vast cast.
Yes.
And, each one of them is introduced so wonderfully. There's a description which says that, I think he said Stub, or I think it's Stub. he puts a pipe in his mouth before he puts on his trousers every morning, which I thought was so wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, this beautiful descriptions of whales and whaling. If you, as you said, that's the kind of thing that could turn someone off a novel these days. But if that is completely what I am into, so you're reading it almost religiously then.
I was, and I actually had, another edition which was on my Kindle,
Yes.
which was also, I used to mark that up. I don't like to write on my books. I feel like I can't write on my. I don't know. It might be a very Indian thing that you really respect books, or at least that during the time at which I grew up, you didn't throw your books around. You respected your books, and so I don't feel comfortable with marginalia. I only do that when I'm teaching a particular book. Then I write everywhere because I have to.
Okay.
But otherwise, no. So I had an edition in which I was marking things up.
Okay. Well, I mean, I used to feel like that about my books. Once you've done it once, you do it for the rest of them. So this, as you'll see, your book is it's covered in. So maybe I won't show you that. Wow, but I'm so glad because it's such a. I mean, I don't need me to say, but it's such an interesting novel, and there is layers of it threaded through. You can see the influence.
Yeah, and it has this, it's one of the few books from that time which acknowledges that there were people from different parts of the world on a ship. You have these Lascars on the ship, and they're sailors from, say, countries like India and Malaysia.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. So, I mean, it is but it was a book that was with you, and that's the thing. It was with you, whether it's so it's an important object for sure.
It is.
We've had a flag. We had a letter opener. We've had this was not specific, but someone just said small tiny objects, and they're just quite like miniature objects. So we've had a film poster, and we had books and specific books sometimes. But I don't think you'd be very pleased if I took this particular copy, though, would you? I think
no. This has now become a sacred object.
Okay.
Yeah.
So look after this. And sorry, I don't mind me touching it, but well, thank you for sharing that. And I think we should leave it there.
Okay.
Deepa Anappara, it's been genuinely has been an absolute pleasure to speak and get to know you and learn more about your work and your influences and the absolute extent of research that you appear to do. But it has been a real joy and pleasure. So thank you very much for joining me live, having a coffee with me. It's been an absolute blast. But for now, The Last of Earth is out now. It's published by One World Publications. Thank you very much, Deepa, for joining me on the Rippling Pages.
Thank you.
So I was thinking about this, and I came then to a debut that was released earlier in the year by Larissa Pham. It's called Discipline, and it's published by Serpent's Tale. Now, Pham's first book I haven't read, but it's called Pop Song. But it is telling in its description, I think, as we speak about journeys today. In that book, she traveled to New Mexico, Shanghai, China, and it's described as a book that's Pham meditating on the miles we are willing to cover to get away from ourselves, those who hurt us, and the impossible gaps that can exist between two people sharing a bed. It's a book about all the routes by which we might escape our own needs before finding our way home. And so I think there's something within that about discipline. And discipline had me thinking about the artistic politics, I guess, in how we depict travel and journeys. And it isn't a travel novel or anything like that in its own right. It doesn't really appear as a journey in its own right. I'm not sure anyone would classify as that, but it did have me thinking about some of the themes that I've spoken about here. So what is it about? Well, it's about a young writer who is on a tour promoting their debut novel. And the novel is about an affair that the writer had with a professor a decade or so ago. She eventually receives an invite from the professor to go and visit him in his house, which is an island off the coast of Maine in the United States. And so what this story becomes about is a story about desire and why we return to people when we know that they're not necessarily healthy, or the relationship with them is not necessarily healthy for us. But it's all within this art world, this meta art world, and it is meta, but it also, it's not just it's not a big language or postmodern game, and it's one of those novels that is written in this really tight prose, yet it's not spare. And so what happens is it keeps the pace, but also merges psychological acuity with the protagonist's internal thoughts. But how history unravels in the narrator's own mind is paired with this unraveling of their memories. And doing the press tour of the book promotion, which is where the first part of the novel starts, thinking about how these different timelines are set up and how Pham writes those different timelines to ultimately try and provide context for the decisions that ultimately lead her to her Professor's home. But it's all quite intricate, isn't it? Because they've written a book about this, and it's all about the motivations and the desires. What goes into what the desires lead us to write about this, what does that actually to enact the things that we write about. And so I think one of the things that I really find, and it goes back